all right, so I could start maybe, I mean, I didn't announce that it was gonna be public because, recorded because I wanted people to come here to ask us questions and voice their concerns, comments, but we'll go ahead and start. So tell me when you're ready and we'll start.
You're on.
Oh, I'm on, okay. Hi, I'm Trina Mayer. This is Rich Revlinsky, Randy Farkas, Jeanette Larison. We are broadcasting and having our open public utilities meeting. We met a little earlier to deal with some things, but I wanted to open it up tonight because we had a public meeting at the end of June. And at that meeting, there were quite a few people there, and we made an announcement regarding the lead services in town and what the DEP was mandating us to do, which was to add a corrosion inhibitor to our water system because we didn't pass 2 top tests. So at that meeting, people were very concerned, as they were at a meeting a couple years ago, that they didn't want to add more chemicals to their water. And so what happened was we did some research and found that there might be a way to appeal because we had passed the lead test twice. And I'm happy to announce tonight, and I will just read a little of the announcement that we got. The Bureau of Water System Engineering is in receipt of Milltown Water Department's request dated July 18th, 2019 to suspend the installation of the orthophosphate corrosion control treatment approved by the Bureau. Prior to the Bureau's approval, Milltown Water Department met the lead and copper actions for 2 consecutive 6-month monitoring periods during the first half of 2018. Therefore, in accordance with 40 CFR, the Milltown Water Department may suspend the installation of CCT at this time. So what happened was in April, we went down and we had tried to appeal to the DEP. The CME, the water operator, John Eckert, and I went down and they said, absolutely no, the rule is if you fail twice, you are mandated to use this orthophosphate forever. So there was no recourse. So what we did was we went back, we said, and believe me, at that meeting we, said this is something that the people don't want, and they said, no, you have to do it. So I'm happy to announce that, we heard the concerns of the public, we did appeal, and the appeal was successful. So and this is on the condition that we don't fail another lead test, because then if we do, we will have to do the corrective action. So we spoke at our committee meeting earlier about having, what to do as far as the lead service lines, and that's something that the utility department will address in the next few months. So that's that. And then, I like to have these every few months because I know utilities seems to be the biggest concern in town, so we want to hear what you folks have to say, your questions, your comments. I know it's hard to get here, so I asked people to email or text me questions, and I got some, not a lot, but some, so I will read through those, but,
Well, just before you do,
sure.
Trina, you want to read the last paragraph here?
Yep.
That if the Milltown Water Department incurs a future action level exceedance for lead and/or copper, then the Milltown Water Department has 24 months
Correct.
from the date of exceedance to permanently install the orthophosphate chemical feed system for CCT as approved. This includes obtaining the required permits from the Bureau. Please be advised, Milltown Water Department will not be permitted to suspend the installation of CCT again if another action level exceedance occurs. So just to clarify for folks, that's 24 months from the date of exceedance. So if you take a sample and it takes a few days for it to get back to you and you report it back to the Bureau, the clock starts ticking the day you take those samples. So we should have our backup plan in place and probably have everything picked out, a system designed in case we ever have an exceedance again.
Right. But it's incumbent upon us to try and avoid that as best as possible, which we have been doing all along. We were very close on the second one that we failed, but yes, so that's what I said. If we exceed again, we have no recourse but to use the orthophosphate. So, any questions about that? No? Oh, yes. I don't know if we have to, do we have to do name and address, or is this just an informal public meeting?
Well, say it anyway.
Phil Zambrana, 40 Van Loo Avenue. So what happened from that meeting in June? Like, so testing in April, we had that meeting in June, and all of a sudden we're here in August, and all of a sudden they said, you're good.
We did research to see that there was something in the ruling that said if you passed twice, you had another recourse to appeal, which we did, and that's why we got the favorable outcome.
And what are the odds that we're gonna have an exceedance? We're gonna exceed that level at some point? Like, what's the plan right now to make sure that doesn't happen?
So we've passed 2 years in a row. Really, and we just talked about this at a great deal at our meeting, is the the lead service lines from the main to the home, those houses have the greatest chance of failing again.
Okay,
So we will have to address how to get those replaced. I mean, I don't know, on the news, they're doing
Newark.
that. Yeah, exactly.
Newark, yeah.
Exactly. But they got a loan from Essex County to do that, because those service lines belong to the homeowner. So we discussed ways to help the homeowner or get the homeowner to replace their lead service line,
Okay.
which is the same problem that we had 2 years ago, that as a borough, we can only go up to the
Right,
line. And the
right.
service, we didn't have a program in place to compel the homeowner to replace their
but we're
lead
looking to
service
have that plan in place going forward.
line. Right.
Okay, thank you.
And just to let you know, Mr. Zambrana, the issue here with us is that we don't really have control over what sort of sample we're gonna get. Besides coordinating with New Brunswick and seeing if they dose the system at all, that with any anti-corrosion inhibitor, or if there's a better time of year to take samples, that's the only action that we can do to try and hedge our bets. But if all these samples are taken at a home, if someone takes a sample incorrectly and says they did it correctly, for example, the first time that we had an exceedance, which was 2 years ago, it happened because the sample was taken at an abandoned home. And there's provisions to circumvent that and not take a sample from an abandoned home. However, once the sample was taken, it had to be submitted, which got us into this mess. So we have to do a better job of making sure that the samples are taken properly and try and make sure that we take them at the appropriate times where we can try and mitigate the potential for an exceedance, as well as develop a lead service replacement plan and really encourage those residents to replace the services. So that'll also help.
And as we stated at the June meeting, if we were compelled to use the corrosion inhibitor, there's really no impetus to replace those lead service lines, because that's addressing the problem anyway. So now we're back where we were 4 or 5 months ago. So that's what we have to move forward on. Okay? Good. So I have some, anybody else have questions? We have some that were written in, and I know, and Jeanette, do you have anything to add about this?
I do not.
Okay, good. Good, good. So we discussed at our meeting a little earlier, department issues, this. One of the things, and I'm just gonna go through some of the questions that were addressed. One of the questions I got was about, and let me just say that normally in utilities, we don't deal with the rates and the billing, that's finance. But I got a lot of questions, so I'm just gonna touch on it. I don't have all the answers, but I just want to acknowledge people's questions. And if we don't have an answer tonight, we're gonna follow up on it. I got an email from someone that had a question about why Milltown's utility rates aren't handled by the Board of Public Utilities. I forwarded that on to our BA, and she started to do some research but hasn't found when it was originally
When we
signed
possibly
out.
opted out, or what happened,
Right.
why.
So there's
That is-
something in the history of the utilities that must have happened many, many years ago, I would assume, that exempted us from that, correct?
Correct.
Right. Okay.
And Jeanette, I know you've worked in other towns too, but it's my understanding that typically municipal-owned utilities are not regulated by the
Correct.
BPU.
Right.
However, if you were a private water utility or private purveyor, those rates, including those by PSC&G, JCP&L, what's the other one out there, electric-wise, but those are regulated by the BPU, and they have to submit all sorts of data to the state to justify why they need in their budget to be able to increase those, how the money's gonna be spent, et cetera. And those are usually done in like 3-year terms, so they'll say, this is what we're gonna do for 3 years, they discuss it with BPU, BPU says okay or no, these are the rates you can charge, they'll set those for 3 years, and then 3 years later, they amend them again accordingly.
Right, so that's something that we'll have an answer for soon, yes. Any other questions about, well, as long as we're talking about rates, do you have any other questions about that? No? Okay, so I will read another one of the questions. Another question was that, and this is rate, sort of rate related, it's about the delinquent, utility, electric and water sewer. So at the council meetings, we, for the finance department, we always read the amount that's delinquent for water and electric. And I think at the last meeting it was mentioned that we collect that when the house is sold. And I've had some questions about why wait that long? Why, how do we recoup those delinquent charges? And so Jeanette actually had an answer for that tonight too, that we don't wait that long. So if you could clarify for us.
So the state of New Jersey requires every municipality to hold an annual tax sale. So any delinquent charges there's 2 types of tax sales, and the type that Milltown holds is called a standard tax sale, which means we sell the delinquent charges from the prior year. So whatever's delinquent from, say, 2018 will now be listed for tax sale in the 2019 tax sale, which is coming up now. The collector is now preparing that list. So we'll catch all of those delinquencies at that point. So we don't have to wait years for a house to sell. But if the house does sell in the current year under delinquencies, then certainly those charges would be caught up at that point.
I think also it's probably good to note that when we have the tax sale, typically it's outside companies that will buy up these liens. The borough is able to charge, I believe, 18% interest on unpaid? And then when those liens are sold, the individual who purchases those by law can charge an interest rate as well. So the borough gets paid, but the homeowner or property owner is still responsible for paying the liens back to whomever bought them.
Right, so if I could just interject and say that, yes, we charge an interest rate on all delinquencies. When the delinquency gets sold, which is, it's just a delinquency that gets sold, that a lien gets put on for that, the lien holder would then pay the current charges, and they would earn the interest rather than the municipality. So whatever interest rate that we would earn, that's what the lien holder now earns, but we're getting our money 100%, so.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna throw this question up, and I actually don't have an answer, but hopefully somebody on the Utilities Committee does, or Jeanette. I get asked a lot about utilities, specifically about solar power. And the question is, there's partly an answer, but, somebody can take this. What are Milltown's policies regarding solar energy? We have our own electric, but is there any interest in having some sort of incentives to encourage this renewable energy resource?
We looked at this about 2 years ago when our former BA was here. And one of the reasons why the borough does not provide a deduction in the full amount of what you're charged. In other words, if you're paying, and I'm just going to throw some numbers because I don't have them off the top of my head, but if you're paying 10 cents a kilowatt, which I actually think it's closer to 14, the borough only allows you for what you put back into the system to pay you for 4 or 5% per kilowatt. And the reason for that is because those are what we consider the avoided costs. We still have to maintain, part of our rate structure is the fact that we have to maintain our lines, maintain our system ourselves. So we buy in bulk from PSE&G or whomever the New Jersey Public Power Association has executed the contract with to buy in bulk, and those rates are set for what we pay as the borough to bring it into us or for what we use. However, that doesn't include all the costs for running a utility system and running our electric utility. So the avoided costs are what we pay for electric and not necessarily for what the homeowner pays for electric, because we still have to maintain the lines. It's unfortunate that it is that way, and we looked into possibly adjusting that, but with the construction of the new substation, it's not something that we'd be comfortable with changing our rates around potentially and falling into a hole there financially and not being able to pay our bills.
I think the other point in that is that there's actually two parts to your electric bill. There's the commodity charge, the actual cost of the electric, and then there's also a added transportation charge that the utility who brings our electric into town, which is public service, they tack on a little bit for that convenience for us to bring the electric to us. So in every bill, there's always two charges. You might not see it, it's kind of folded in. It'll just go into the rate, but there are two parts to that bill.
Okay. So circling back to the rates again, one of the questions that I got emailed to me was, we talked about the surplus, then the surplus was depleted last year. The person wanted to know when would that be filled back up, which we talked about at the budget meeting, but then also do we have any expectation of lowering the rates now that, once we've built up the surplus again? So we discussed that at the budget meeting, and the auditor stated, Jeanette, that was not feasible.
Right.
So, and I guess, and people were confused about that because they're like, well, where is it going? You know, so that was the question that I get asked a lot, like, okay, I get that he said that we can't reduce the rates, but if the rates filled up the surplus that was depleted last year, and now we're gathering surplus again, what's happening to that?
Right. So I think the misconception was that what you were raising the rates to collect was gonna somehow just, we needed X amount of dollars, and now we'll raise them, and now we can go back to where we were. But no, we actually need that money to support the budget every year. That was our shortfall. So it's not a surplus, that's the amount we need to support the budget each year. So we need to, set a new level of collections, and that was just to pay for the water and to pay for operations.
Right, and probably good to be noted that there's a difference in terms between surplus and, what we were trying to collect in last year in order to make the budget whole. And part of that is that the surplus had been depleted over many, many years. And allowed to dwindle down because,
not raising the rates.
Because we never raised our rates despite increasing costs of operation between our labor force here within the borough, as well as increased costs from the county, as well as increased costs in buying water from New Brunswick. So when you don't change the rates over many years and you finally deplete all your surplus by avoiding raising the rates, now you're stuck with a hole in the budget to fill. And the only way to make sure that we're on solid ground for the future is to maintain those rates. And quite frankly, we should be looking at instituting a plan to continually and always maintain whatever rate increases that we receive to pass those on, whether they're from labor negotiations and the cost of doing business within the borough, whether those come through from the Middlesex County, from what they charge us if they increase their rates to us, or from New Brunswick. It's a cost of doing business, and we can't just turn a blind eye to it and hope that it goes away.
So, and the question then, and I'm sure it was asked at a meeting, and I've been asked why didn't we raise rates for all those years? Does anybody know the answer to that?
Well, I can certainly tell you that 3 years that I had utilities, each year we had over $300,000 of surplus. So I think it would be quite detrimental to the town and to the residents just to arbitrarily raise rates for no reason. If you're gonna carry $300,000 of surplus in the water and sewer, there's no reason to raise rates. If there's any kind of additional funding or any kind of additional expenses that come out, that can be taken off the surplus and not raise rates. So I don't necessarily believe the argument that because rates weren't raised for many years, that then all of a sudden you have to raise them. I don't believe that's true. I believe that a lot of that is because of a project across the street that money was taken out for down payments. That's to make the budget whole. That's where your money went.
I'll disagree respectfully with Councilman Farkas in that if we can absorb increase in costs by dipping into our surplus, then we're going to wind up where we were, which is depleting the surplus. We need that money to pay for engineering fees, to plan projects for improvements in town. We need it to pay off loans so that we can do additional projects in towns. And, you know, you get nowhere without money if you want to improve the water system. So relying on maintaining just a certain amount of surplus when we had, I believe 2 years ago, we had 2 water main breaks, which cost us about $180,000, or forced main breaks, as well as all the extra water main breaks around town where we've had to call in emergency service contractors. These things all chew into the budget, they all chew into our surplus, and we have to make sure that we have enough of a cushion there to absorb those that year, as well as not drastically increase things the following year. And by not raising them over the course of many, many years, that surplus, our cushion, gets flatter and flatter, so.
So Jeanette, I know you don't have the budget in front of you, but I remember we had a discussion at the budget meeting that we lowered our surplus this year for the water sewer, or our access for, because I remember the complaint was we had very little left in there.
What I recall without having the numbers
Right.
directly in front of me was that, yes, the amount that we would normally use to offset some of the operational costs through the surplus just wasn't there. We didn't regenerate the money.
Right.
And that all stemmed from, you know, the need to raise the rates.
Okay, so, and that's been, you know, from what I've heard, people say, you know, okay, my rates are raised, but, you know, if they felt like we were doing projects or, you know, improving the water lines or the sewer line or things, that would be one thing, but the rates were raised and, you know, they were told it's for a shortfall, okay? Now what, you know, and so that's the discussion that we had was, how are we getting to the projects that we need, you know, without putting money into the surplus or a capital fund or things that we need to work to. And I believe, you know, we as a committee are fully aware that there is a lot to be done. As Councilman Revelinsky said, the water main breaks, the forced main breaks, that's gonna take some capital planning on our part to get to, so that we don't have those hitting our operating budget, but that we're doing improvements to take care of a forced main that's 100 years old, and we've spent at least $300,000 fixing when it breaks up by McDonald's, you know, and believe me, you know, I'm going to use whatever ways I can to reach out for any help that we can get, whether it be from the county, from the state, however we need to do it. I mean, we are in a position where we really have some capital needs that need to be addressed to avoid those expenses that will eat even further into our very, very limited capital surplus and that's with the 30% raise last year.
And that also affects the operating budget.
Correct.
Because we're putting all that extra money in there
Right.
To pay for the repairs. So if we
Right.
can do the improvements, then you can start decreasing the budget a little bit because you won't need all that extra money.
Exactly.
And we
Exactly.
should note that, you know, the borough hasn't been completely negligent here in maintaining our system.
Okay.
A lot of people, I know you're waiting for it to say the greatest little town in the land up there, but the water tower was a hefty price to pay. But, you know, if we don't maintain our water tower, if we don't paint that regularly and put in those improvements that are needed, that'll cost us $5 million or $3 million to rebuild instead of $1 million to paint. We've done cleaning and lining along JFK as well as various other streets in town. And going back as far as 2005, we cleaned and lined all of Main Street, the water main, to try and improve the quality of the water and decrease any brown colored water, discolored water that comes from the rust buildup inside those pipes. But, you know, the fact of the matter is, and we can look at Newark and say, my God, look what they're going through, but anywhere in New Jersey, unless it's a brand new development, is facing a lot of the same problems. Our pipes are old, we've grown and grown and grown, and the time has come that, you know, ductile iron pipe, if it wasn't cement lined back then, it's clogging up, it's shrinking down, it results in increased pressure, breaks, additional strains on the pipe, as well as trying to just maintain things and the quality, as well as what the DEP has come down with, whether it's in regards to maintaining your valves by creating an operating schedule where they have to be operated every year, which costs additional manpower and labor hours, as well as going out there fixing those valves, which otherwise might not have been turned in 15, 20 years. The testing requirements, we test for disinfectant byproducts, which disinfectants into the water are placed at the treatment plant. As a result of that chemical reaction, you get byproducts, TTH5s or TTHMs and HAA5s that needed to be tested for regularly. You have to have licensed water operators. All these things just compile the cost of operating a system, and unfortunately it hits a lot of the smaller towns harder than the bigger towns because it's an economies of scale issue. But we've been doing a good job over the years and trying to improve things and listening to the residents and make things better and improve the quality of life. But, you know, we're definitely aware of the fact that all these projects cost money and there's only so much to go around. We don't have Route 18 or Route 1 to get all those businesses to pay taxes to the borough and not increase other costs throughout the town. So we're unique in that matter, but we suffer like Helmetta, we suffer like Spotswood, we suffer like Middlesex Borough, and all the other ones around the county that are small little towns that operate their own systems and try to do the best they can with what they've got, and not a lot of businesses.
Right, it all comes down to the taxpayers. And, you know, since I've been on the council for a year and a half, been advocating for us to follow our capital plan. Because as I said, if we don't have the plan, then it's hard to have a vision of where we need to go and what we need to do. And part of it is the choice of the council as to which projects to do. Because as we know, if we don't maintain our water lines or our sewer lines, we're either gonna have poor quality water and other issues like that, or the worst case scenario, which we had a couple winters ago, is we're paying people all the time to fix the broken things. But if you could, Councilman Revelinsky, because Councilman Revelinsky was the utilities chair for 2 years, the other question I get a lot that people don't understand, could you explain what the need was? It was 1.5 million to do the water tower, and you know, it wasn't just to make it look nicer and paint it. The reason for the big project was to reline the water tower and do a whole.
Yeah, the water tower is constructed of steel. And as anyone knows, if you leave a piece of metal outside that's iron, it starts to rust. The coating system that was on there was greater than 20 years old. The intended life and manufacturer's stated intended lifespan for those coating systems, the paint on the inside as well as the outside of the tank, is about 15 to 20 years. So farther exceeding that, you start to develop little pinholes. Those pinholes lead to a lot of rust and oxidation on the steel. That becomes potential catastrophic failure of your tank, which could lead to a very, very costly repair, as well as us without a tank for a demolition phase and reconstructing. So the time had come where we need to maintain our investment on that tank. The decision was made that while we had it empty and drained, that the best thing to do is to paint both the inside and outside. Additional telemetry, or layman's terms, communication systems were put in to coordinate with mixing the tank to make sure there wasn't a big dose of chlorine sitting at the bottom, that it was always stirred and the disinfectants were properly maintained throughout the volume of water that's in there. There was also some valve work that had to be done outside to make sure we can operate the tank properly. The communications also enabled our ability to coordinate with where we bring water into town. At the north end of town, the Elkins Lane Pump Station, which has a chlorine analyzer or dosing system that injects a little bit of chlorine in there to make sure that the water is staying chlorinated throughout the borough. So all those things go together to help us operate a system more efficiently, better, and also judge the pressures that are going on. If you live on the south side of town, before that tank was built, you'd know that in the morning taking a shower was like watching the water just drip out of the faucet. So now that that tank's in, we get better pressure, but again, if the pumps at the other end of town shut off, we get a big reversal of flow, and pressures on the south side of town spike and not on the north side. So it's a balancing act, it's a dynamic system, and all the improvements that we made to that tank don't just benefit the tank, but they actually benefit our system as a whole.
And just so everybody knows, yes, there will be the logo painted on there. That was, I know that people wondered about that. There was a spill, and so it will, the spill, not from the
Paint.
contractor, paint
Paint,
spill.
it was paint.
Yes,
Just-
is being addressed, and once that's all settled, then the logo will go up. But that was a delay. It should have been done a couple months ago, but I know people want to see their Milltown logo. See you. Hey, it's a little thing. Randy, you have anything to add about that?
No.
Okay, good. All right, so my next question from people is, I had an email, and this wasn't for recently, but this was a while ago. Is there what, I mean, we talk about brown water. I have to say, I've never had any trouble with brown water whatsoever. But, we hear it a lot. Is there an area in town that seems to be worse than others? Have you guys experienced it at all? No,
We wouldn't.
No.
Ours has all been clean.
right. So, I mean,
The Foch, and
what-
any circle, any loop.
Yep.
the loop.
It's dead-end streets.
Certain other, but there are a few other areas that seem to be like the known problem areas,
Now,
right?
Ends, like.
Oddly enough,
Right,
I was
the loop,
walking.
Definitely the loops, yeah.
Oddly enough, I was walking the other night with a neighbor who lives on JFK, and they said they can't believe the improvements that they've experienced ever since we cleaned and lined. And for the folks who don't know, the brown water comes from rust inside the pipe. They call it tuberculation, but it's a buildup of rust. The water reacts with the iron, creates rust, and as the water travels through the pipes, it dislodges a little bit of that rust and it travels downstream. Folks who are on the dead end or in a low pressure area, well, if you don't have a lot of flow passing through, all the traffic of that rust stops in front of your house, and in the minute you turn on your faucet, it goes away. Or not goes away, it comes through the house and then you gotta let it run. A lot of folks have home filters on there. It's not dedicated to one specific spot in town. People get it, and it all depends on the time of year. When we do the hydrant flushing, the intent there is to loosen up that rust and get it out of the pipes to maintain a clean system. It's done twice a year, but when that occurs, you disrupt that high volume, creates high velocity, and that high velocity scours those pipes, and you get a little bit further downstream. It can also occur when you get a water main break, or if someone opens up a hydrant anywhere in town for any reason. The rust just seems to travel, and it goes to the area where the flow is occurring. So the dead ends, it collects. People along Main Street, along Riva Avenue, Washington, typically don't get it as much because it's passing them by and getting sucked into the neighborhoods off there. So the smaller the pipe you have in the road in front of you, typically we have 6 inches, it's about the smallest in town. There is a section with 4-inch, but the 6-inch diameter pipes get hit a little bit harder than the 8-inch, so if you're on Clay Street, you typically don't get it. But anything can happen when the system changes. I know some folks on the south side of town, when the pumps shut off on the north end of town for water, and we start using the tank over by Home Depot, you change direction of the flow of water within our system. that dislodges it. So suddenly, folks on the south end of town are saying, why am I getting brown water today? The utility department has been great in regards to trying to get those nixles out and let everyone know ahead of time when you should expect it. But if you've got a continuing problem in your house and you've drained your hot water heater after the last occurrence to make sure you get any sediment or rust that's been sitting in your water heater over the years, if you've drained your hot water heater and you let it fill up and you get it again and again, please let us know, because that is an area of town or a situation that we'd like to be aware of, so that our capital improvements plan can be amended to address those areas, and not just say, we know this is an old pipe, it's weak, it's broken once or twice, it needs to be addressed, but we've also got a major brown water issue that's occurring off of this street. That helps us plan for the future and
Right.
decide what projects get done and where the needs are.
And that's partly why I asked, so that we can, and, you know, we do have, I would encourage you to go on the website and report a concern, because that's the best way that we can track it. You know, we can hear from folks, and call up, but if you do report a concern, and we all of a sudden start seeing everyone on, you know, I don't know, Durst Drive is having brown water, that would let us know that there's an issue there, or, you know, wherever there's a loop, because we've had time and time again, people coming, and I know there was, I believe, some money set aside a couple, maybe when I started last year, to replace some loops, and I don't believe that was done. And so I think the last time we did a big water line project was JFK, right?
JFK,
And
that was about 3 years ago.
About 5 years.
5? Okay.
I think they were just finishing that up about 3 or 5 years ago.
Right,
Between that
so-
time frame is when it started.
I think
And
that's
that-
something that
the
we
other-
need to address.
Well, the other issue that we had with the brown water in some of the dead ends is that there's several ways to handle it, and some ways work, some ways don't, and sometimes you don't know if it's gonna work or not. In speaking with our engineer, they've had success and they've had failures with looping. What looping is if you live on a dead-end street, the pipe that runs down your street comes to a dead end. Looping ties that pipe back in to itself, basically at the base of your street. So if you live, give me an example here of a dead-end street. If you live on,
Mary Court.
yeah, there you go. If you live on Mary Court, which actually they had a closed valve for some time, so water was only flowing in one direction on Wendy Way. But if you live on Mary Court, the water goes down Mary Court and it stops until you use it. So the sediment or the rust does the same thing. You would loop it back all the way to Wendy Way and put a valve in the middle so it forces water to pass through your neighborhood instead of just coming there and waiting for you to use it. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. In other areas of town, they've put it through an easement at a dead end to go to the adjacent street. If that street is already getting sufficient water supply from another location, sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. But again, that's why we flush. When we flush hydrants, you flush them, you run them until the water comes clean. Sometimes a hydrant will take you an hour, and the very next year it could take you 2 hours for that same hydrant. It just matters where the rust builds up and where it's flowing from at that time.
And we also just recently had hydrant testing, which I got a comment that it's still up on the billboard, but that's all been completed. That was mandated by the DEP that they test all of the hydrants. So again, kudos to the utility department for doing a good job on that. And, you know, as usual, when we talk in the utilities committee, it seems like most of the concerns are about water sewer. Any feedback about electric, problems, questions, concerns? No, because that seems like it's pretty much remedied, right? So we took care of what we needed to. What was it, 7, 8 years ago, we had all sorts of issues, and now we seem to be.
Well, we're headed in the right direction. There's still a lot of work to be done. A lot of
With
our
the lines
transformers are
Which
old.
we talked about. We talked about that, that's true. I mean, and I will say that I have to, you know, thank the utility workers. When we had transformers blown in the hottest day of the year, they were right out there and did a fabulous job getting people back online so that they weren't without power for too long. So it's appreciated, and we've been lucky with the short staff that we have, that we could get to these problems as quickly as possible. Let me see, I had one other question about, hold on. Well, anybody want to chime in while I read my email? Randy,
Oh, no.
do a song? I'm sorry. Sorry. What was it? All right, so the other thing, and I'll let Councilwoman Revelinsky speak to this. We've talked about rates. As I said, that's a finance committee thing. But now that we made some public announcements, so people had questions, we've had calls here at the office, we've had emails, we've had responses. So, my only comment is that, we do things as a committee, we have a BA that, we deal with, and so, once we do things as a committee, that's when we present it to the council. So, I appreciate the councilman's enthusiasm, and as I said, what we do is in response to want to do things for the public. So, and if people have voiced their concern about their bill and they want to, talk about monthly billing, we can certainly look into that. However, what we need to do is fully vet that with the BA and the tax department or the utility department to make sure that before we put an ordinance out that we've addressed all of the possible concerns about personnel, about costs and things like that. So that is where people were concerned. So I'm gonna ask Councilman Revelinsky to address that because it's something that, the BA and I weren't aware of, and we just wanted to make sure that everybody got up to speed before we brought it to the council so that we would all be able to vote on something that we had the full information about.
Sure. So my proposal here, and I mentioned it at the last council meeting, was to introduce an ordinance at the September council meeting regarding moving to monthly billing. The reason for that is in my tenure here as chairman of the utility department for 2 years and now a member of the utility subcommittee, the same response again and again from residents about I get billed for June, July, and August, and my bill is astronomical. Where other people in 2/3 of the town don't get billed for those same 3 months at one time. So the proposal here is simply to amend our ordinance to move from quarterly billing, which also makes it extremely difficult when you amend rates. You have to charge 2/3 of a bill and 1/3 of a bill at different rates. We've already got the personnel out there doing the meter readings for electric, but sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The proposal is to simply move from quarterly billing to monthly billing so that everyone pays for the month of June in July. Everyone pays.
All three, electric, water, and sewer?
Yeah. For all 3 bills, you get your electric bill separate from your water sewer. Your water sewer is 1 bill. But essentially what we're looking at is merely taking that and moving it into monthly billing. It'll help folks who get a bill after 3 months of usage where they say, oh my God, it's $600, I don't have $600 in my pocket, I thought I only used $400. It'll help people who are on those tighter budgets. It'll help us also analyze how much water gets used each month. From an operational standpoint, I for one would like to see how much water we use when we're flushing hydrants because we can get our bills and we can compare those things. If you listen to Councilman Dixon's reports from finance on the outstanding or delinquent bills, more often than not, the higher amount of delinquency is from the water sewer department. And the reason for that is it's a very high bill and people kind of take their time or they do what they can and they pay it as best they can. But you're paying a large bill that accumulated over 3 months. And it's just an inefficient way to operate. It doesn't really tell us what's going on in the system. We don't know when our super high demands are. We've also heard from folks who say, I fill my pool. This town has flat rates for their sewer system. All these things that when we looked at amending the rates, the water and sewer rates last year to try and make up the budget shortfall, we couldn't consider moving to monthly billing because we had to make sure we filled the gap. Now that at the end of this year we've made up the shortfall that we needed to, and we believe that we're on sound financial ground, it's time to come to a monthly billing. So the idea of proposing it now is that it's instituted in March, not instituted immediately. That'll give the folks down here at the borough about 3 or 4 months to get all the ducks in a row and make sure that we've got the appropriate personnel, we know how we're handling it. And in my discussions with both the BA and with our tax collector or billing department is that we can do it. It's just a matter of how we're going to approach it. Do we have the appropriate manpower? Are we geared up for it? It's not something we can just snap our fingers and do tomorrow. But by not passing the ordinance or not proposing it at this time, it will wind up going into March, and we'll be looking at the budget for next year. And then before you know it, it'll be summer, and the bills are out, and everyone goes, oh my God, I'm getting hit again for another 3 months in the summer. And unfortunately, this has been the way it's always been, is it's put on the back burner, and it's not taken care of early enough. So the proposal at this time is very simple, to just divide it by 3, do monthly billing, not mess with the rates. And then we're going to see what sort of implications those have with the staffing requirements for it, any additional costs that may come up, if we can incorporate those or absorb those with our current rate structure. But it's not intended to change the rates at this time or change the usage. It's things that get us thinking about all the things that we should be doing and finally have a chance to look at now that I believe we're on sound financial ground.
So last year, we discussed it when we raised the rates, and if it's 4 quarters or 12 months, why couldn't we do it last year?
Because the system that we were utilizing when we were juggling, typically when you do any sort of analysis, you don't want to change too many variables at once. If you've ever taken Mr. Corrado's chemistry class, he'll always tell you change one variable. The variable last year was setting the rates structure and the tiers. That's what we could work with. If we switched to monthly billing last year and started dividing by 3, as well as adding in some other things, it was going to be way too cumbersome to try and institute a plan that made up the money. We wanted to be sure that based on the previous usage of 2 years at a quarterly billing cycle, that we were going to make up the money necessary for the budget. So now that we've done that and successfully, and Jeanette, I don't know if you know the number offhand, but it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 300,000. I think we brought in about $5,000 more, if I'm not mistaken.
I think we're right on target.
Very close, right on target. So it worked. But now that we know that that worked, now it's time to continue to work towards monthly billing. We discussed earlier this year possibly privatizing because of all the work that we had to do within the borough and keep up with current mandates by the state, all the regulations, staffing requirements, improvements to the borough, debt service, all those wonderful things that go along with running your own utility. And one thing resoundingly occurred when we spoke to those private utilities was they do monthly billing. And they do it because it helps. And when you do have to amend a rate, it's small. It's a very small thing that can be absorbed in the pocket as opposed to getting whacked with it at the end of 3 months. So I thought that now is the opportune time to do it because we want to make sure that we have our ducks in a row for implementing it in March. And I don't see any reason why passing the ordinance at this time would be detrimental because it gives us the time to work at it.
So Jeanette, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a couple questions about it. Do you foresee an increase in cost to do this? And I also, do we have the software easily change to monthly, and the personnel and the postage? Have you run any numbers to see what the increase would be to implement this?
So some of the costs would include that we feel that we're probably going to need additional staff. So whether that means making our current part-time, make that a full-time position or add another part-time position, that is one of the things that we're looking at. We'll probably need an additional water meter reader because the urgency to make sure that all of those readings are in on time, that would be another part-time position, and we would also need additional equipment, another gun for reading. As far as billing is concerned, the software can handle however you want to bill, so that's not that doesn't really come into play. Other ancillary things would be, cost of postage, cost of, mailing, the actual bills. And those are things that, we would have to take into account, so.
Rereads and things like that.
Rereads, and that's why we would need an additional person, so that we can have the steady reads going on for part of the month, but then also in the meantime, be able to send that third person out. Either A, to expedite because now we're reading the whole town for water. We already read everything for electric, but it's that much more time consuming to do the second read for the water. So they would, some parts of the town, we're already doing that at the same time. So to have the entire town done, it's just a little more time consuming, and then we would have those additional rereads that, occur throughout the month.
So in your discussion with the utility billing department, was there any concerns about being able to accomplish that in a month?
No, it's not that you can't accomplish it, it's about the work that goes into it. Which is why, it's not just a snap of the fingers, it takes some planning. As you know from the meeting earlier, we have 432 out of 2,700 water meters, roughly 2,700 water meters or water customers in town that are estimated. Those are estimated bills that Jeanette, I honestly don't know how they do it. If they come up and they say, well, about 5 years ago, this was their monthly bill, so here you go. We get other residents in town who take a picture of their meter and send it in so we have it, because not every meter in town has a touchpad where it can be read outside. So again, giving ourselves 5 months to implement this also means giving ourselves 5 months to go around and get those 432 meters set up so that they can be read appropriately. Not having residents call in their numbers, not having us estimate and then a resident coming back and saying, I don't think your estimate is accurate, and not having people take pictures of their water meter, even though it's got a serial number on it, and sending those down, because all that is extremely time consuming. Most of the homes have touchpads, and a touchpad is very simple. They walk up by, they scan it with the gun, there's your meter reading, and you walk on to the next one. So out of 432 left to go, and the touchpad doesn't necessarily always require a new meter be put in, but it does require entry into the home, 5 months to get in there and start installing those touchpads. And if it's not done within 5 months, it's a goal we have to work to. There's a lot of things we need to tackle in this town to operate more efficiently and operate and do better with less, right? We're all on a budget. So things get pushed year to year because there's just not time to do it. And it's time to put the emphasis on the things that we can change. And one of those things is doing these monthly billings creates the emphasis on helping residents with their budgets, helping them plan accordingly, and replacing some of those meters and creating the touchpads and operating more efficiently. It's not an easy task. We need time to do it, but little by little, we keep the emphasis on, and that's how change occurs.
Thank you. So, no, yes, please, go ahead.
Quick question.
Do you want to, can you come up to the mic? Sorry.
Sharon Honer, 15 Richter. What about commercial? I worked in the utility department, didn't last long, didn't want to stay there. It's rough what those ladies do. It really, really is. And now you're going to do it every month. How are they possibly going to take the volume with taxes? Are you going to add ladies in the office too? I hope, because you've now taken something that was spread out quarterly and now put them all in the same month. And they're coming by stacks of check. They're coming in person. They're coming, all different ways. But also, how are you factoring in that these same readers read commercial? How are they going to do that all in 1 month? That's just would be my concern. I think you may need a couple full-time meter readers.
Well, so, and that
to
was
be
part
honest.
of the reason that we should have, vetted it more, because my concern, and I immediately went to the BA, was if that's what the people want, we're gonna look to get it for them, right? But if we have to hire a decent amount of additional staff, then are the rates going to be able to stay the same? How much operating expense can we absorb? So the concern was, yes, we want to help the people, we want to, address their concerns and do things in a more efficient way. However, to do that, if we're going to take on a lot of extra expenses and therefore come back to you to take more money, then that's something that we as the council really need to address and look at before we dive in.
Yeah.
So I don't think, and I just found out about this, I don't think that we've looked at how many people we would actually need. But to your point, you make a good point. That's a lot of extra.
And you're not right now
Sure.
using your meter readers for rereads. So if you're not using the part-time people for rereads, you're using your actual staff.
Correct.
Again, that's a tough balance. That's a tough balance.
We're trying to get them
Well, we-
back to
Yeah,
you doing
but I will
what
also
they
say, I
need to
work in the
do.
construction office, as you guys know, and we had a record number of sprinklers installed this year. So how bad is it? That's just my thought. Sprinklers, people are watering their grass.
Good.
I did some quick math here, and we have approximately 2,700 meters in town. Now, I'm not saying that anything's gonna change rate-wise, but the full-time clerk positions in this town are typically around the $30,000 range, between $30,000 and $35,000 for a full-time person. Now, that doesn't include their benefits, but if you take 2,700 meters times 12, assuming $1 per month, that's $32,000. Now, at the last council meeting, we put in an ordinance to go out and get another meter reader person in town, another person to come in, a part-timer to come in. It was proposed by Councilman Farkas here and seconded by Councilwoman Mayor that we get a third. So we're already on track. We're already
We're not
moving
gonna-
forward
we're not
with
gonna
having,
use the third.
with having
The
thirds.
third
Well,
was a backup.
but we can also rotate through. That becomes a personnel matter that, again, this is the type of things that'll get discussed over the course of 5 months, but to rotate people through and say, okay, this month you're on rereads, next month you've got the 2 weeks of standard reading, we can rotate through and help that. And again, we should have a lot less rereads once we put in the touchpads and get things working properly. This puts emphasis to address other problems as well as solving a residential concern. This addresses operational issues as well as addresses residential concerns for consumption and for getting their bill quarterly, and the disparity between the folks who get it for 3 months in the summertime. I laughingly called this the Revelinsky Rate Equalization Act of 2019 because that's what it does. It equalizes the rates for everyone across town. Everyone pays for June in July. Everyone pays for July in August. There's not folks getting socked in October for June, July, and August, or September rather. So this really creates a balance. Instead of having folks nervous about watering their lawns in the summertime and saying, I don't know what my bill's gonna be in a couple months. They know, and they can keep track of it a little bit better. Now, the software we have is certainly capable of doing monthly billing. It would be more legwork in the office, but there's other things as well that we should be improving upon. Whether it's paperless billing, if folks want to sign up for it, or whether it is online billing. One person I noticed on Facebook had said, why can't I just pay in advance and you deduct it from my account? Well, I'll tell you that when I pay my utility bill, I usually round it up by $20 and leave it in there, and I just make it an even number. So we're certainly able to do that. But when you look at the amount of money that's left out month to month is unpaid, the majority of it does come from water sewer. And I truly believe that that's a result of getting billed quarterly and then saying, I just don't have the money this month to pay it all. And a lot of those are some of the businesses. So to Ms. Honer's point, how are you going to do commercial? Well, maybe this keeps the pressure on those commercial businesses. And maybe we need a little bit more teeth in our ordinance to make sure that they pay in a timely fashion.
So, and I asked immediately to the BA, if somebody gets that sticker shock bill of $800 in September, and they really can't afford it, can they pay $250 a month to catch up?
Yes. They can.
But don't they get hit with the
Well,
interest?
You're gonna pay interest.
You're gonna pay your
You can
18%
pay,
interest.
But you're
I mean,
gonna
that's-
pay interest.
That's the thing, you get hit with a bill you can barely afford now because it's at the end of 3 months and perhaps you didn't plan for it or perhaps something happened in those 3 months. Perhaps you were away for a week and your sprinkler broke outside and water was gushing out of your lawn. And you don't know it until you get that bill 3 months later, the implications of that.
But
So-
they've always worked with, I've
There-
been here 17 years, the utility department has always worked with every resident if there was a problem.
Right, we've,
No one's ever been shut off because they couldn't pay because of a hardship.
right.
Correct.
Right, hardships are one thing, and we've certainly worked with them, but, you know, we have our regulations about requiring the interest to be paid, so hopefully this helps people budget a little bit better, and plan for those things, and keep track of things a little bit more. I know when I get my bill, I plan for a $1,000 bill every 3 months, and I'm delighted in December when I get my bill, because it's not $1,000, and, well, that's a couple presents for the kids. But it helps. It helps getting a bill monthly and knowing what you owe and where you stand.
So the next step on this would be, what, put it up for as an ordinance?
Well,
What
Well,
was your
tomorrow-
proposal?
Yeah, the next step would be for council to put on and introduce as an ordinance to move to monthly billing. It to be instituted in the month of March or perhaps even April. I have set some time to review some of the very questions that you asked tonight with our BA and with our billing department tomorrow to meet with them and go through some of this. Now, we've had our casual conversations over the past 2.5 years discussing this and trying to move forward with that. And we have had some personnel changes. So Jeanette is I know she's still catching up on this, and she's been here 4 months, and we're definitely putting her to work. But we'll be meeting on that tomorrow to help figure out some of the shortfalls, some of the other things that need to be considered for this. But at the next meeting, at the next council meeting, I intend to have an introduction of an ordinance to move to monthly billing.
So are you meeting with them as a member of the utility committee, or, because you're not on the finance committee, correct?
That's correct, yeah. So I'm meeting with them as a council member, which everyone has the capability to do on their own or in subcommittee, to discuss a plan and initiative that I've been working on for several years. And I will certainly share those thoughts and recommendations and what we've come up with others, both in the finance committee as well as the utility
So
subcommittee.
you put this out to the public before you met with the BA and the utility department?
No,
billing person?
Yes. That's why I'm here.
I've
I
just.
put it out to the public at the last council meeting. The only thing I got was a response from one person saying, why didn't you discuss this at the utility subcommittee meeting? Which the previous utility subcommittee meeting lasted about 3.5 hours discussing personnel. And it's something that I've been working on and I'd like to see go through. So I'm doing my homework and trying to get this to move forward. And I will fully share all that with the other members of council and the discussions that we've had. But, you know, sometimes you gotta just go in and start getting things done and start digging into something if you wanna take it and accomplish anything and not wait around for the convenience of everyone else.
You mean a collaborative body?
No, the collaborative body votes on it. The collaborative body will have the information and be able to discuss it and question it. That's why we discuss it and propose introducing something so you can ask questions and have a meeting like this and then have the full story when it's introduced. And again, introducing a resolution or an ordinance is an introduction. It gets the ball rolling. It allows more opportunity for the public to ask questions. It allows more opportunity for council to ask questions. And then we have the vote on it, whether or not to do it. And at that point, as you very well know, you can always amend it and say, I don't like this ordinance. I don't like the way it is, that it's March. I think we need more time. I think it should be April. I propose an amendment. You can do whatever you want. You can vote it down. You can vote for it and say it's the greatest idea you've ever heard in your life. There's plenty of ways to do it, but if we don't actually start doing something, then nothing will ever get done.
Correct. And that's totally fine. I have no problem with voting on it. My concern was that the BA and Kelly didn't get a chance to do their due diligence to come up with the expenses, how it's gonna be implemented, all of that before we mentioned it to the public.
That's why
Correct,
we-
Jeanette? That Jeanette has some of her work to do in a meeting with.
And we've been putting it off for some time because of that. But Kelly had, I'm not gonna use employees' names. Our billing department had taxes to go out. They had to wait on certain things, waiting for the state to approve their budget. Things have been hectic. And unfortunately, every time you try and sit down and get something done, if it's not an immediate need, a lot of times things get pushed. And it's no one's fault. It's just because other things are taking priority. And I'm trying to make this a priority so we can address it, because quite frankly, I would have loved to address it last year and have it implemented in April so that folks this year didn't get socked with the high water bills at the end of the summer. But it's come to the realization we have to act in the fall in order to implement those changes for the spring so that the folks see the benefit of it in the summertime.
So I would encourage the people from the public to, weigh in on, monthly, quarterly, any concerns, questions?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Phil Zambrana, 40 Van Loo Avenue. So the rate structure isn't changing, as far as I can tell, right? It's going to be the same rate.
Jeanette?
We haven't, as far as I know, we're not looking to change the rate.
Right, okay.
As far as the rate structure and all of that is concerned, we haven't
So,
really run all the numbers yet.
in just the way I'm looking at this off the top of my head, if I'm being asked, instead of paying my water and sewer bill quarterly, now I'm going to be asked to pay it monthly, right? So the cost is going to be the same. There's not going to be any differential in cost, other than a change in process so the borough gets paid faster, right?
No, that's where you're wrong. And the whole
What am I
purpose-
missing? I mean, I'm not
If
going to
you'll
pay.
let me explain,
I'm
I
not going to
will.
pay a quarter later. I'm going to pay every month, which I personally don't have a problem with. But
The benefit is for the folks who, let's say you get billed for June, July, and August. And I don't know if you do or not where you are. Maybe you
Right.
get your bill in August, maybe you get it in September, I'm not sure. The point is, you fill your pool.
don't have a pool, thank God.
You-
Don't have sprinklers, thank God.
Okay. Well, let's pretend for a moment you
Yep.
do.
Yep.
You fill your pool.
Mhm.
It was a hot June. And you say, man, my grass is starting to look a little brown. I want to water it. And I put it on all summer long because I don't know any better. And then August comes around, it starts to cool down a little bit, but I've had watered the lawn all summer long. And then you get hit with that bill for $1,000. And you go, geez, if I could go back and not have watered my lawn in August, or maybe I should have turned it down a little bit, or maybe I should have considered the fact that I shouldn't have done everything in June that I wanted to do and space it out, because now I'm paying for it in the end. This is what helps residents budget a little bit better and not get into the, I have to take 3 months to pay this bill off and then have to pay the interest on it. And I know we work with them, but to help avoid some of those hardships. I, for example, when I first moved into my house, I put my sprinklers on. I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. I got a $1,000 bill at the end of the summer, and I said, oh my God. I turned my sprinklers off. My grass is brown, it's disgusting, it's ugly, I don't have a pool. I put them on the next year, and I thought, okay, well, I fixed what was wrong. Well, there was a leak, and it was only when I was cleaning leaves out of my gutter that I looked down and saw a puddle in the corner of my front yard from the sprinkler running. Had I not caught that, I would have been shot at the end of the summer for another $1,000 water bill because the water was running. I wouldn't know. It helps people identify those issues early on. If you've got a leak in your system, if you've got a leak in your pipes, if your faucet's running, if your toilet's running. A toilet running can add thousands of gallons, and you wouldn't even know it. If you were away for a month and thought nothing of it, you don't know what you're getting into. That's the benefit of this. It's not about collecting our money any faster or trying to say, we're billing you every month, we need that money right now. It's not about that. It's about trying to help the residents benefit from budgeting a little bit better and getting those bills monthly instead of quarterly and creating equality. Because if you, for example, and again, I know you don't have a pool, I know you don't have sprinklers, but let's say you get your bill in June or July. So you get billed for June, April, and May.
Mm-hmm.
April's nice and wet. It's springtime. Grass is growing beautiful. May, a little bit cool, not too bad. Run your sprinklers all June long. You haven't hit your 7,500 gallon limit. other folks who are running their sprinklers and doing those things in a dry summer from June, July, and August are hitting that 7,500 gallon limit right away, and then they're hitting up to the next tier and then the next tier. So we get folks who are hitting the third tier, the highest price per gallon, in those summer months, whereas the folks who split those summer months in their billing cycle don't necessarily. They might have used the same amount of water in the summer, but because that bill is split for those summer months, then they're not hitting that highest tier because May was a little bit wet, April was a little wet.
Whether it's quarterly, whether it's monthly, all you're doing is taking the same pot of money and divvying it up into thirds or twelfths, 1/12, and paying it, which I don't have a problem with. I'm a little bit concerned when, did I hear you say people actually take a photo of their meter and send it in?
Mhm.
You allow people to do that?
I wouldn't, but when we have 432 estimated reads and there's homes in this town where you haven't been able to get in there because people aren't home, it's become an acceptable practice over time. The benefit is that each meter, I will say that the only reason that it's kind of comforting is that the serial number of the meter is available in that photo. So you see the meter and that, and typically those are time stamped anyway, and the folks will say,
Do we
okay, I
have,
took it
but do we
today.
have any, like, any idea whether that estimate is high or whether it's low?
We only
You
when they
don't-
It's an
complain.
estimate, we don't know
You don't
until
know.
the next time we get in there, and then it levels itself out, but it's a matter of when is the next time that we're able to get in the home for various reasons, whether we can't connect with the resident, whether, they can send pictures, whether they don't let us in, whatever the situation may be. And that is a detriment to it.
It is.
It's a burden
It is.
to the town, so
It is,
we
yeah.
need to address that.
And we've had, believe it or not, we've had folks that have, we were just looking at it, 3 estimates. Now, 3 estimates, that's 9 months of the year we estimated your bill. I don't want those residents, when we finally do a read in December, to go, oh my God, they estimated me low all these months, and now this third quarter, I'm getting hit with a gigantic bill because of the tiering system.
So if I understood you correctly, you said you've been thinking about this for the last couple of years.
Mhm.
But I'm curious to find out why you're bringing this up now, when the budget's already been set.
Because the budget's not set for next year. Because this
Budget's
is
not set
something
for
that,
next year.
as we plan and move forward, you want to focus on these issues now so you can incorporate them into your needs for next year.
I don't feel like you have enough personnel, though. That's the other issue. Unless you're gonna have, if I understood this correctly, you're gonna have one person going out with a reader for electric and a reader for water and sewer, doing all 3 at the same time?
Well, they already do that. It just would be every month for the entire town.
Right. 1/3 of the month gets billed, or 1/3 of the town gets billed every month for water and sewer.
That's
But-
great.
Right, it's 1/3, so then the next third of town gets billed for water and sewer that month.
Right.
So this is really only billing an additional 2/3 of the town for water and sewer each month, because we're already doing 1/3 every month.
Again,
It's just
why,
the
why,
cycles of
why are we
rotation.
waiting here? Like, if you've been thinking about it for 2 years, why are we thinking about it now?
Well, actually, we're the utility committee, it's actually a finance committee thing.
And no one here from the finance committee is here,
Well,
right?
no, it's the utility. meeting, so
Because
they can't.
this wasn't an open public meeting in that
It's
you
just-
announce it, put it into
No,
the
that's-
Sentinel,
that's
and then you
fine.
can have more members of the governing body
I go to
present.
every meeting. I do remember you saying something about, talking about rates and so forth going forward. But the only reason I'm here is because I saw something on Milltown for All that said you were gonna be able to do this, this, and this in this year, and we were gonna take care of it like right away, which I don't know how anyone
No.
could do that on Milltown for All without talking to the rest of the council.
All I did is reiterate the things that I had said at the council meeting to help bring it to the attention of the public so that they could come down to a meeting like this or the next council meeting and ask those questions.
No, I think it's, I think you don't have enough personnel.
Well, that's what they're gonna have, Jeanette's gonna have to,
And-
and the utility department is gonna have to address that.
I'm assuming 5 months would be fine, assuming. But in those 5 months, I would think you'd have to take care of those 432 meters.
That's right.
Otherwise, you're gonna have a problem next year, so.
Or at least a good portion of them, and then keep working away, chipping at them month after month until they're all up to snuff with what we need and what we should be operating on.
Okay, thanks.
So, you mentioned the minimum, and that reminds me of another question that I got. The minimum, how is that gonna be handled over on the monthly bill? Because now it's 7,500.
Right,
for
so,
the
so
full-
right now, we bill quarterly, your minimum bill is 7,500. This proposal, this ordinance is merely to move to monthly billing, so 7,500 or 75 is easily divisible by 3, so then your minimum becomes 2,500. And then, based on how everything works out over the course of a year, hopefully, whoever's up here at that time, the governing body, can say, perhaps we can lower that minimum and help some of the people who really don't even use anywhere close to 2,500. Perhaps we do need to adjust that gap, because there's quite a bunch of folks that came down during our, when we had the discussions about the rate changes last year and the increase that we were facing, that said, I don't even use close to 7,500 gallons, but I'm paying for it. East Brunswick, for example, charges a flat rate for sewer. Now, they do it quarterly, but it's $80 a quarter, a flat rate for sewer, which is terrific. But when I asked them, how are you doing this? They said, well, we hit all those businesses along Route 18 pretty damn hard. And that's not a luxury that we really have. So, you know, there's pros and cons. They go direct to MCUA for their sewage flow. We go through New Brunswick, who then handles it and goes to MCUA, and we pay New Brunswick for that. The benefit, New Brunswick can only charge us for sewer based on the water we use and not meter our discharge. So there's pros and cons to everything we've done here in the borough from the time of its inception to now. I don't think anyone ever acted in ill will or to try and slip one past the goalie. But there's certain things that with modern technology and what we're trying to accomplish to be more efficient that we can change. And it's time we start focusing on some of those less costly endeavors to try and change those year after year to make a small difference for the town and the quality of life of the people.
So hopefully, when we're looking at making things fair and equitable, and if it's monthly, that's fine, you know, I'll look forward to getting the full report on personnel, things like that, but the fair and equitable, definitely the minimum is something that needs to be addressed, because I know the seniors have really borne the burden of the increased minimum. I hear from them quite often, and actually they've paid the price for the extra rate as well. I mean, that seems to affect them. The tax rates, they have senior freeze, but the utility rates and the increased minimum will really hit the seniors the hardest. So if we're looking to do, make things fair and equitable, I think we have to look at how that's affected people as well.
And again, I think one thing at a time. Our focus now is how we're going to implement it. How can we make sure that the 5 months, or if it has to go to April, the 6 months, or whatever it takes to get it working, turns out, and then review our finances at the end of that year, and then start determining how we can amend the rates. Because, quite frankly, it's not just senior citizens. I have friends who are single mothers, young single mothers in this town renting, paying water bills and saying, I don't come anywhere close to the 2,500 gallons. And it's true. The seniors are on much more fixed income, but when you think about a mother who's paying for childcare or paying for kindergarten and then running around with a job, single, trying to fend for herself, it's hard on everyone. And to get socked with $600 or $800 at the end of the summer it's tough. You know, we try and do what we can here to provide for the residents and give a good place to live. And if we can make little changes like this that'll improve things, then, that's why I took it on.
I appreciate that. And that's, I'm glad that we had this forum to be able to explain it, to people had questions, and that's why we're here. It was a little out of the realm of the utilities, but, we were meeting anyway. We want to be, have all the questions answered, get the word out, and if it's something that the residents want and it'll help the residents, we will do that. But I wanted to make sure that we answered all the questions before we proceeded forward, and we still have a few things to look at, but, I appreciate the explanation and the enthusiasm for it, so thank you. Any other comments, questions, concerns? No, I don't think I have anything else in the email. So with that, I will say thank you for coming, appreciate it, enjoy the holiday weekend, and we will see you here at the council meeting on the 9th. Appreciate it. Thanks, Russ. Thanks, Rick.
No problem.